In this example, we're finding the inverse of a function. Very typical exam 1 question in methods, so let's go with that and see what we can find out. It looks pretty straightforward. We've got a function here, f of x equals 2e to the 3x plus 1, and we're firstly asked to find the rule for the inverse function, and secondly we're asked to find the domain of the inverse function. Alright, now the main problem students have with a question like this is their setting out, and it's very important to set these things out well. I'll explain as I go. Okay, part A, we're finding the rule for the inverse function. Well, the first thing I do is I drop the f notation here and I just call the function y equals, because I want to have a simple way of swapping x and y to get my inverse function. So that's what I do first. So I say let y equal 2e to the 3x plus 1. A logical statement to make, but many students don't make it. Now the next thing you've got to do is tell a little story about what you're going to do, such as, for the inverse, swap x and y. Now if you don't say that, guys, if you just go swapping x and y, then you're making no logical sense at all. In fact, it's quite incoherent mathematically. So please state what you're doing before you do it. Just like that, okay? So therefore, x equals 2e to the 3y plus 1. Now our job is to solve it for y, okay? And then we will have our inverse function. But the other trap is you've got to put it back into this style of notation before you leave that part of the question, okay? Let me show you. We're solving for y, so e to the 3y would be x minus 1 all divided by 2, and now because y is in the exponent, we've got to take the log of both sides to get it out of there. That is the log of both sides with a base of e. So therefore 3y times log of e with the base e, which of course is 1, would be log to the base e of x minus 1 over 2. Now we divide by 3, therefore y would be 1/3 of log base e of x minus 1 all over 2. But as I said to you guys, you must go back to your f of x notation, otherwise your answer is not correct. So therefore we say, therefore the inverse function f to the minus 1 of x is 1/3 of log base e of x minus 1 over 2, and that's correct. That's correct, put a box around it, have one last look at it, make sure you've answered the question, and then get out of there, okay? Now, here's another little bit of advice for you. If they ask you for the inverse function, you must provide the rule and the domain. If they simply ask you for the rule for the inverse function, as they do here in part A, you do not provide the domain, guys, because if you do provide a domain, and if that domain turns out to be wrong, even though you got your rule correct, as I did here, you will be docked marks. That's the harsh reality of the situation, guys. So don't do it. If they don't ask for the function, including the domain, e.g. if they just ask for the rule, just give them the rule, guys. Just give them the rule, okay? Alright, now next part, B. Now we're just going to find the domain of the inverse function. Well, that comes from the range of the original. Now the range of the original, if you imagine in your mind's eye an e to the x graph, which would normally float up from the y equals 0 point as an asymptote and then go up to infinity, so it'd be 0 not including 0 up to positive infinity. So if it's translated up by 1, then our range of the original function would be from 1 to infinity not including the 1. So there we are. Now that's going to be the domain of the inverse, okay? So therefore we just write it out like that. The domain of the inverse is from 1 to infinity not including the 1. So a round bracket, be very careful with that. So that's okay. That's how to do it. So the traps, guys, are your notation, the way you set things out. You've got to tell a little story here before you go swapping x and y. Let y equal the function by all means, but make sure you go back into the notation that they use at the start of the question, otherwise you'll be wrong. And don't give them any more information than what they ask for. Just remember, the rule is the rule. It does not include the domain. The function does include the domain, okay? But in any event, in this question, you had to provide the domain here anyway. Alright, that's it. Alright, we'll see you soon.